Great, good to go. All right, thanks for coming, everybody. Appreciate you being here. Today we have Matt Wilson, and he is a physical scientist with the NOAA Office of Coast Survey. He received his master's here at the Center for Coastal and Ocean Mapping in 2012, and he received an MBA from Penn State in 2016. He now works at the Atlantic Hydrographic branch in Norfolk, Virginia, where he's involved in data verification, ship support, and compiling data into nautical charts. So thanks for coming, Matt.
All right. Thanks for the introduction, Matt. And it's great to be back. Thanks for having me. And before getting started, I just want to say thanks to all my project partners that you see listed here. And just in general, thanks to CCOM for the support, to HSTV as well for their support in the distribution and development of these tools that I'll be talking about. So I want to start first with just some context for those of you who may not be real familiar with the ping to chart workflow in Coast Survey. So the field that you see there in the top left, that's comprised of our NOAA hydrographic fleet and contractors, and so they send their acquired survey data to the hydro branches. That's where I work. I work at the Atlantic Hydrographic branch, and so there's two major functions that we serve. The first one is the survey review, where we're reviewing all this incoming survey data and making sure it meets all of our requirements for quality, completeness, data integrity, and so forth. And then so the next major function we serve is we compile all this high resolution hydrographic data into a nautical chart product. And it's called an H-cell. That's the output of my office. So this is a preliminary chart product in the S57 format. And so we call this process chart compilation. We send that to our marine chart division, who uses that to create chart products, and those go out to the world. So again, the two major functions that we do at the hydro branch is survey review and chart compilation. So this is where QC Tools comes in. This is a suite of software applications. So in these processes I was just telling you about, survey review and chart compilation, we have these common challenges that a lot of hydrographic offices have, where there's these very tedious and monotonous tasks that continue to persist. And so what QC Tools does, it focuses on automating these monotonous tasks. So this alleviates the manual burden and also has the benefit of reducing the human error that's inherent in these monotonous tasks. And we prioritize the review where the intervention is needed rather than spreading that effort out equally across all the data. This is based on the modern methodology that says we no longer need to inspect every single sounding we acquire. We just want to know where there's problems. QC Tools helps show you where those problems are, so that's where you can focus your attention. It's a highly modular build with open source inputs. These take bags and S57, which are all open source. And it's easily customized because of that modularity to any kind of agency-specific requirements. So in this case, obviously, we've tailored this totally to the Coast Survey specifications, but the way it's built, these could be easily changed to meet the requirements of any hydrographic office. And there has been cited a recent increase in data quality and timeliness. We just had our field procedures workshop a couple months ago, and this has been attributed in part to Coast Survey's adoption of QC Tools. So here's a little bit about the workflow of QC Tools, what we do. So we're in the processing software, and at some point we identify certain limitations or inefficiencies just when we say things like, I wish we could do this, I wish we could do that. Those are the kind of things that we do separately in QC Tools. So from the processing software, we bring over grids, bathymetric grids and feature files. We bring these into QC Tools, where here we let the machine do the heavy lifting on these real monotonous tasks that we're automating. And we have total freedom here, which is really nice. You don't have to submit a help desk ticket or anything. You can do whatever you want. It's really nice. And we customize these things, not just to our specifications, but even in-house best practices and things like that. And then so when we're done with it, we export that back to the processing software just via a drag and drop. We have these QC layers that we print into S57 and then drag and drop these layers back to the processing software to help you focus your attention, guide the review. So QC Tools has been developed in HydrOffice. So this is a collaborative effort between NOAA and CCOM, and this is an open source research software environment. It's all open license and open contribution. We encourage the community to contribute here. And it's, again, very modular build, easily updated and maintained. And see, like when I was first starting to create QC tools, I didn't know how to do any of this. I was coding just out of pure desperation, just to see if things would work. So it was HydrOffice that really allowed for this thing to survive and build up to be built build it up the right way, so it's easily updated, maintained, modularity, all those things. This was really critical. And it's ease the construction of building these ocean mapping tools, lowering the barrier to the implementation of something like this. There's all these libraries that you have access to, BAG libraries, Caesar libraries, S57 libraries. Rather than reinventing the wheel, you can just hook up into these libraries and lower the barrier to implementation. And there's apps for all phases of the ping to chart process. Literally, there's an app that you can use during data acquisition. There's QC tools are very much focused on survey review. And we have these QC tools that we use during chart compilation as well. So there's truly apps for all phases of ping to chart. And these exist as standalone click-and-play solutions. You can just run with a double-click, don't even need Python installed. Or the NOAA versions are distributed via HST Hydro, which I'll show you what that is on the next slide. So you can go to our website here at hydroffice.org and download QC tools. It runs on a .exe. Again, you don't even need Python installed. You can just run it. You can access our online documentation or download a PDF manual. For NOAA users, almost everyone has Hydro Explorer installed. So what this is, you run this program. This is our one-stop shop for all sorts of in-house software that we built, Python utilities, run QC tools right from here. This works really well, this distribution system. This is how we send software out to the whole fleet. Things update automatically. You don't need admin privileges. It works extremely well. It's really an underrated thing that we have, in my opinion. Okay, this is the current version of QC tools. There's 4 tabs that you see here along the top. The one that's activated right now is for all the functions for survey review. Right next to that here is it's called the DTON scanner to help the field rapidly identify dangers to navigation in the field. And right there, that's for functions geared towards chart review, chart compilation. And then the last one is the info tab, where there's links to the documentation, other helpful links like that. So you see here, you can just drag and drop, bag files, 000 files. You're bringing in grids, feature files, and then you can export PDF reports, all these different types of layers that you can bring into the processing software to guide the review. And you can set an output folder. All this is drag and drop, and it's reading the native data formats. It's very convenient to use, which has made this really easy to use and popular. And then so there's these 8 different functions here, all geared towards different elements of survey review. I'll introduce each one of these briefly. Here's kind of the flow. So for survey review, we focus, the survey review encapsulates all the data we get, but we tend to focus a lot of time on the bathymetric grids and feature files because those represent final survey products. It's frankly that's what we care about the most. It's the most important. So that's what we use in QC tools. So the grids go through these functions. The first one's called Flier Finder, and it does exactly that. It finds flyers, also known as just anomalous grid data. And then we have a function called Holiday Finder to find holidays, just gaps in the grid. We'll talk briefly about that. And then the Grid QA evaluates grids with respect to density and uncertainty. And then finally, a tool to ensure that designated soundings were done so properly. Feature files, there's a function to scan features to ensure proper attribution. And then we have this function to export a seabed area objects in the proper format for archival. And then finally, this is the one tool that uses both the grid and the feature file, because what we're doing is checking to ensure consistency between those types. You're checking to make sure that features all have proper representation in the grid with respect to depth and location. And then the most recent QC tool is called Submission Check. And this, you just drag over a directory structure, and it's checking to make sure that the folder structure is as specified in our specifications and deliverables. I'm just going to hit each one of these briefly over the next couple slides here. Flier Finder. The second part of my presentation, I'll go into a bit deeper dive on Flier Finder. We've actually done some evaluations recently to compare it to manual reviews to assess its effectiveness. But quickly, Here's some gridded data in 3D view. You can probably see some pretty obvious spikes in there. Are you going to find them all with your eyes? You might not. In 2015, we reported that 25% of the time you can't find them all. So that's a big problem for us. So there's been various iterations of Flier Finder. This is one of the earlier ones. It's real simple stuff. You just have this moving window that scans the grid nodes. If a particular spike fits within a 3 grid node window horizontally and a certain height tolerance, then it gets flagged and helps guide your review. So here's a section of grid with several spikes. You run Flier Finder, you drag the output back into it, and you see those spikes are nicely lassoed to guide your attention so you can decide what needs to be removed. Holiday Finder, here's a grid. You can probably see there's a lot of little gaps in there of no data. Are those holidays? So we have certain definitions of what a holiday is per object detection multi-beam coverage requirements or complete coverage requirements. They require a certain number of nodes in order to be defined as a holiday. So the only way you can find out is to start measuring in there. That was the only way to do it before Holiday Finder. Now we can do this automatically, which is a huge time saver. Here's what Holiday Finder looks like. You have this knob. You can set it, if you set it to all the holes where it's set right now. So there's 3 different holes in this little grid here, and they're marked by the number of nodes in the hole. So 12, 7, and 2. So if you set this thing to all holes, they all get flagged like this. If you turn that toggle over to object detection, an object detection holiday NOAA defines as needing 3 collinear contiguous nodes. So in this case, only 2 of those are holidays. And then per complete coverage definition, or full coverage, you need a 3 by 3 node hole to be a holiday. So only 1 of those gets flagged as a holiday. So you set this per your requirement, you find all your holidays. The Grid QA, this is a long-standing tool within NOAA that got incorporated into QC Tools. So this is our specs are finely tuned into here. We have a spec for density that says that 95% of all grid nodes need 5 or more soundings. So here's a nice histogram of your whole grid, soundings per node. You see right up here at the top that 99.5% of those meet the requirement. It's really nice for the field to run this stuff. You get a hard pass or fail so they can move on to other things. For uncertainty, we have this layer called the TVU QC layer. It's just the ratio of the total propagated uncertainty to the allowable uncertainty. So anything greater than 1, you've exceeded your allowable uncertainty there. So you see in this example that 99.5% of the nodes have passed, which is nice. So that's the Grid QA. Scan designated, we have in recent years, we've seen a lot of designated soundings in our grids. Some would say over-designation. We have certain specs that define when a sounding is allowed to be designated. One of them works on, it's the total vertical uncertainty of the sounding above the grid. That needs to be half of the allowable total vertical uncertainty, or in water depths greater than 20 meters, the full allowable total vertical uncertainty. So rather than spending a bunch of time measuring, which is what the field was doing, you could run this, and here's a quick filter. Those were each filtered by the TVU. There wasn't enough separation between the sounding and the grid to even register as a designated sounding. Those are removed. So yeah, I should have said that each one of the soundings up there is a designated sounding that came in from the field. So 3 of those are removed. There's also a horizontal requirement. We're not supposed to have any deeper designated sounding within 2 millimeters of survey scale horizontally to a shoaler one. So that 80 right there is actually filtered by both TVU and by this horizontal requirement. And then finally, we have a spec that says for sounding to be designated, it needs to be on a feature that has at least a meter height off the seafloor. So there's 2 more that are filtered for neighborhood. This is kind of a subjective thing, but we threw it in there anyway because it can be helpful. So out of these 9 designated soundings, only 3 of them are actually eligible for designation. So we're actually, our new spec just came out for 2017. We're trying to tone down the use of designated soundings, and so we're encouraging these to only be used for dangers to navigation or in instances where it directly increases safety of navigation. So we expect it to kind of tone this down. It's traditionally been kind of a contentious topic. Scan features. This is what you see on the bottom there. That's straight from our specifications and deliverables manual in Chapter 7. This describes mandatory S57 attribution for features. So this is an underwater rock, and this is saying that an underwater rock must have these S57 attributes: value of sounding. You can read them off there. So what we do is we run this, we drag in the QC layer, we see, okay, there's a rock, and it said, the message I'm getting, it says, well, first it says redundant rock. That means there's actually two rocks right on top of each other. This kind of thing happens quite often. You may not know it because it's right on top of the other one. So there's a rock you can delete. Invalid source date. It's missing some S57 attributes. It's good to know. The valsal check is checking this. It's another rock right here. It's checking that it has proper representation in the grid of bathymetry. So what it does a quick scan of the surrounding grid nodes, and it's searching for a matching depth for that feature. So in this case, it's marked with both a depth discrepancy and a position discrepancy. So if we dig a little deeper, we see that that feature, the value of sounding there is a 16.4 meters. And in these grid nodes, we sort those by depth, and the closest match, our spec, they need to match to centimetric precision. So that's not a match. That's why it sprang the depth discrepancy. We'd also expect that feature to be within at least one grid resolution horizontally. So that's why I got the position discrepancy as well. So this feature scanner I just talked about and the valsal check, you know, if you only have 5 or 6 features, it's probably not so hard to go through and look at those manually. But if you have, 500 or 600 features in your survey, or in the case of this particular survey, more than 3,000, you're not going to want to step through each one of those individually. It'll take you forever. You're going to want some sort of automation to help you. And it's not at all unusual that we get these surveys coming in with several hundred features. So it's definitely a big time saver. Seabed area export. We've had this requirement when we archive this data at NCEI, formerly known as NGDC. It's just a simple ASCII file. It needs to be formatted a certain way for seabed areas. But we kept having these format issues. So we said, well, we already have a feature file in QC Tools. Why not add a button, export this text file in the proper format, and fix that problem? Now I'm here at CCOM. I'm talking with Juliet Kinney and Sarah Wolfscale, and we're talking about new requirements to add in a CMEX classification, a picture, some additional parts for this archival. And now we already have this function in QC Tools, so it's a very logical place for further development for those requirements. And the most recent QC tool is called submission checks. This is straight from Appendix J of our specifications and deliverables, that all of the data that gets submitted to us needs to be in this folder structure. And it sounds like a simple thing, but this is one of the most common ways surveys get rejected, is somehow this gets messed up. Sometimes out there, data management can be half the battle, even more than half the battle, if you have a lot of these surveys. So submission checks at the moment, it's just checking, make sure the folder structure looks like this. It's checking that there's no empty folders if you forgot to populate one of them. And again, this is something where there's a lot of good ideas on how to further develop this. We typically start these tools off very simple and then incrementally add things. So that's the end of, those are all the functions that are geared towards survey review. I'll talk a little bit about our functions that are geared towards chart compilation now. So the outputs from the survey review, feature files in S57 and the bathymetric grid bag file. And so in our HCell specifications, there's requirements for units and precision. All Z values, any kind of depth, is required to be truncated to the decimetric level. Okay, so we have a lot of these. We had a lot of these issues with this rounding, maintaining this truncation. So right at the beginning of chart compilation, what we did was we added these QC tools in the chart review to truncate. We can write to S57, we can write to bag in QC tools. So we truncate these right away. So then these chart components that we extract they carry through this required truncation. So that's the first thing we do, is extract high density survey soundings. And then we take the features that we intend to apply to a chart. And so this is the beginning of our HCell. And so you see there's features. We also get chart soundings that must be a subset of the survey soundings, these dense survey scale soundings. And then what we do is we want to run scan features again, but this time it is tailored not towards our hydrographic specifications, but towards the HCell specifications, which are different. And then lastly, we do a function called the triangle rule. This is a method of validating the chart soundings that you intend to apply to the nautical chart. I'll talk about that here in a second. So here's what our chart tab looks like. It has data inputs of bags, the S57CS, that stands for chart soundings, if that's like the beginning of the H cell, and then your high density survey scale soundings with various output formats. So here's the example of how the truncate works. This is some grid nodes in a bag just before and after truncation. You see that's quite simple, but it's very nice to truncate this on the front end. So everything we derive from it carries forward that required truncation. The feature scan. This is checking to ensure the proper S57 attributes, as I showed previously, but it's actually doing more than that in the chart review. It's checking to ensure the proper chart disposition of some of these elements. Like, for example, if these red soundings are something that you intend to apply to a chart, and you have features you intend to apply to a chart also, you can't have a feature that's right on top of a chart sounding. Those cannot coexist. So that's just the goof that can happen a lot when you're dealing with hundreds of features, thousands of soundings. So it's good to have this automation to flag that for you. Again, all of these chart soundings and features need to have an associated survey sounding with them. If that does not happen, then you get a flag like you see there, the lower flag. That's the feature scan. Here's the triangle rule. We have a method to auto-generate the initial chart sounding selection that we intend to apply to the chart, but it requires additional significant manual edits. You're moving soundings off of features, you're moving soundings off of chart text and other marginalia. There's a lot of manual intervention that's required. So after you're done doing all this manual intervention, you still want to check and make sure that your chart sounding selection is valid with regards to shoal biasing. So what we do is we create a tin of the chart soundings. This has been a long-standing best practice in my office. It used to just be done visually. Now we do it in the software. You create a tin and you categorize each of these survey scale soundings within the tin. And if any of the soundings are shoaler than the 3 vertices of the triangle it falls in, it gets flagged. So for example, like the 7 and the 13, you might not care too much about those because they're close to this charted land. They'll probably be covered by a contour, but that 13 you see down there in the west, that should probably be chosen instead of that 17. That could be a danger to navigation. Some of those 17s out there don't have representation either. So again, always our #1 priority, safety navigation, that supersedes all else. Okay, so I just told you about the triangle rule, and traditionally we use that to validate our intended chart soundings. At some point we realized, hey, it would be great if we did that same rule, but with the existing ENC instead. So this is something that the field could do when they're out there gathering data each day as a way to rapidly identify what we call DTONs, that stands for danger to navigation. So I'll give an example of what this is. Well, first, here's the DTON tab. It's the second tab over. Those take an input of an ENC and your dense survey scale soundings. Okay, here's an ENC. You gather data, and here's a grid. Next thing you do is you extract dense survey scale soundings. So how do you know if you have any dangers to navigation in there? You can manually review all those soundings against the chart, but it takes a long time. You might miss something, human error. Or the DTON scanner runs quite fast. It takes a quick tin of all the ENC soundings. You categorize all those survey scale soundings into those triangles. And I wanted to point this out. So you see there's some shoal soundings flagged here, but what I really want to show you is that any ENC features are also included in this tin, which is a really nice feature because we have some other ways of doing this kind of comparison. What traditionally you would interpolate a surface from these sounding selections and do a different surface. The problem there is those don't generally, or actually none of them that I know of, take into account any of those features. If you don't take into account this feature, it looks like you have a massive discrepancy here and it throws off your whole color map and kind of ruins the whole thing. But if you do it this way, we're using those features in the tin, which is a really nice advantage. So here's the output from QC Tools. These kind of blue colors that you see here, those are the ENC soundings colored by depth. The warm reds and yellows, that's the magnitude of the shoal bias against the chart of your survey soundings. So if you see any reds in there, those are potentially your worst dangers to navigation. So we look back on our chart here, and I circled where those red areas were, and we're going to take a closer look. We zoom in here. So there's a 20-foot sounding here in a circle with a 27, 28, and 29. This could be a deton. It depends on what kind of vessel traffic you have going through here. But anyways, it's good to know about. Up here in the north part, you have a 16 right near a 23, a 19 right near a 25. Again, those may or may not be detons, but in any event, it's really good to know about. Okay, future work for the deton scanner. More often than not, your survey area straddles across multiple ENCs. So multi-ENC input, and then have your tin created across those multiple ENCs would be a real nice feature instead of having to run the tool twice. An option to use the deeps as well as the shoals, or use the deeps and the shoals all together, and that's a step closer to a full chart comparison, which I know the NOAA field units would be very interested in this because this is part of their descriptive reports to perform a chart comparison. There's not really any standard way to do that. So that's something we're looking at. Also, this idea of using the contours in the tin. We have the contours are in the ENC. There's no reason we couldn't use them in the tin. So like here on the left, what you see happening is within this triangle, there's some 11s and 12s getting flagged. You may not really care about those flags because you have this 12-foot contour here. So the idea is to establish certain inflection points along those contours, use those in the tin. It just makes for a more robust comparison. Okay, so we've had out in the field for a while now. During 2016, the deton scanner got added. We've had these survey review functions, chart review functions, the deton scanner, and they're all being used. I've gotten a lot of good feedback. Some of the value added we've anticipated, but there's been a lot of comments that we didn't necessarily anticipate. This is some of the things that we've heard. Some of the time savings is obvious. When you're automating a lot of these manual processes, there's going to be obvious time savings there, which is real nice. Another thing that we heard that people really like is how this can define a stopping point in the survey. There's no such thing as a perfect survey. You could be chasing centimeters forever and never finish. It's kind of nice running these tools. You get a clean bill of health. You can say, okay, this meets all my requirements. It's good enough. I'm going to move on and do something else. It's really valuable to be able to say that. Improved accuracy. When you're automating these processes, human error gets removed, which is nice. And increases the confidence in the data that you review. More standardization. The repeatability is something we hear a lot. It's really nice if you run a certain check, you learn some things, you go and fix those things, and then you can run the exact same check. That's really valuable, and there's not a lot of ways that you can do that. And the ship sees exactly what the shore sees, which is nice. When the ship's getting ready to send a survey to shore, they know the exact checks that we're going to run, and they have all the checks we're going to run. They know exactly what we're going to look at. Helps increase confidence. It helps standardize the process. Okay, and this is some stuff that we didn't necessarily anticipate. QC Tools use as a training tool, how it gives confidence to correct tuition. It might realign incorrect tuition when people are using this. And it helps users understand our methodology. Especially, I've heard that some newer personnel using this, they're getting these flags and they're asking, why am I getting those? I don't understand. They read our online documentation, they're reading our specs, and they say, they can start to understand better, not just our specs, but how they're implemented within the data. So it's used as a training tool. And it's driven the algorithmic interpretation of our specs. And the specifications are written now with automation in mind. This happened a lot in 2016 during these conversations when we're adding new specs or updating some of our older ones. When we're having these conversations now, what's really an important factor is how we're going to automate it. So we make them with automation in mind. We make them algorithmic, which is definitely where we want to be. It sets the foundation for a fully automated workflow. And culture change. This is worth mentioning. I've seen a lot less willingness to accept tedious manual processes out in the field. People are like, well, why am I doing this? Why can't we automate this? Which is a good thing to ask. And along those lines, I've been getting tons of ideas from the field. A lot of good conversation. Some of the QC tools that we have right now came from the field. The submission checks, someone suggested that. The Holiday Finder came from the field. So there's a lot of great ideas out there. Okay, so that was kind of the first part of my presentation. The second part is kind of a deeper dive into one of the survey review QC tools, the Flier Finder. So I'm just going to describe it in a little more detail and then tell you about an evaluation we did comparing it to some manual review techniques in order to evaluate how effective it is. So what is a flyer? This is anomalous grid data. They represent an inaccurate portrayal of the seafloor. They require high time and effort to resolve. And in order to resolve them, you generally need to recreate your grid. So you lose the authenticity of the original field submission, which can cause problems down the line. And we need to ask the question if manual detection methods might actually be lacking. It was reported in 2015 that up to 25% of the surveys received in Coast Survey were affected by fliers, which is a number much too high considering our continual objectives of improved accuracy and timeliness. Okay, so here are 4 different methods of looking at the same flyer. This is the exact same flyer looked in 4 different detection methods. 3 of these detection methods are manual techniques, and they have the great benefit of human intuition, right, which is better than anything we can automate. The problem is, in order to recognize that something is a flyer, you need to first just happen to stumble across it. You might not ever stumble across it in order to recognize it. That's what the automated scan is really good at doing, is stumbling across these things and pointing them out to your attention. Then you can use your human intuition to say, oh, okay, that is a flyer, I need to take that out. Or you can say, oh, actually, that's a rock, I'm gonna leave that one alone, or whatever. So that's how it works. Okay, an overview of Flier Finder. This is scanning your depth nodes for shoal and deep spikes. And anywhere that it thinks might be an anomaly, it writes a flag, we call them flags, to an S57 file that you can drag in the processing software to guide your review. There's 5 algorithms in the current implementation. Some of these require a search height. And these 5 different algorithms are customized to find specific types of flyers. So here's a grid. There's some awful flyers in there. You run Flier Finder, you bring the results in. You can see they're marked. I'm going to look at the same grid in 3D view here. It's pretty obvious where they are. They're not always this obvious. You bring in the results of Flier Finder, see that they're lasted. Here's what Flier Finder looks like in the current implementation. So the very basic use of Flier Finder is just 2 buttons. You click, we have a routine to estimate a search height automatically. It's using the median depth of the grid and the depth variability and the roughness of the grid in order to estimate a search height automatically. So the way that works is the ultimate result. If you have a very deep, dynamic, and rough seafloor, you have a very high search height that's not so sensitive to rocks and slopes and things. If you have a very shallow, flat seafloor, you get a very low search height, so it's very sensitive to any kind of anomaly. So in this example here, I have 2 grids loaded. I estimated the heights, and I got 4 meters and 2 meters back. The next thing you do is just hit Find Flyers. It's going to run the 3 default algorithms that are checked. For a more advanced use, you can customize the search. You click that unlock button there at the bottom of the screen. And then you can go in here, you can force a certain whatever flyer height you want, whatever you're interested in, or you can enable and disable those algorithms. The current algorithms we offer, number 1 and number 2, they're kind of classical mathematical techniques at finding spikes and grids. Number 3 there, that's one that we developed here with CCOM and NOAA, that it's evaluating each node, it's looking at its neighbors and basically asking how different am I from you. And it's particularly sensitive to those pesky flyers that are on the grid edges, which is nice. That's where they commonly occur. Edge slivers also works along the edges, hence the name, but it's actually looking for nodes that are totally detached. And then the isolated nodes will flag any other nodes anywhere in your survey that are far detached from the grid that you may not have known about. Those can come back later when you combine surfaces as awful flyers. Okay, current pros and cons of the current implementation of Flier Finder. It evaluates all the grid nodes for flyers. That is a tremendous advantage. These are the bathymetric grids that we have. They routinely consist of tens of millions of nodes, and it's going to go and evaluate every single one of them, which is a huge advantage. It's going to flag anomalies not otherwise noticed. It works best in the shallower, high-resolution bathymetry. Those tend to be the most difficult to evaluate manually. It does not work as well in what we call steep and deep bathymetry. There's some areas offshore of Alaska that are so steep and deep where you can't even use Flier Finder. You just get too many false positives back. We have really good ideas about how to resolve this issue of the high false positives with like an adaptive search height. But a lot of that development is on hold, and instead it's all of our development is geared towards the variable resolution grid compatibility to QC tools, which I'll talk about a little bit at the end of this presentation. So this brings us to Flier metrics. So in Coast Survey, there's been a widespread adoption of Flier Finder, which is great. This has been an organic innovation. It was developed in the field and started being used because people liked it, which to a degree speaks to its effectiveness, but it still needs to be objectively evaluated, right? We need to catch up the research component to the implementation. So that's the whole point of this Flier metrics exercise. So what we did was I had a couple control grids with several known flyers in them. And so in this way, we could have a bunch of human volunteers try to manually find the flyers in there and compare the results with the machine, in this case, Flier Finder. And so the humans used only manual methods, and they placed flags manually atop potential anomalies in the grid. They're looking at the grid, and they're looking for errors that they think might be holidays, marking them, moving on, and submit those in S57 files. They only had the control grids and the chart for some context. They did not have any sounding data to verify the anomalies. And so the metrics were examined. There were 7 human reviewers versus the 1 machine, and the metrics taken were the detection rates, the time required, the years of experience for the reviewers. So a quick look at the control grids that were used in this exercise. There was 2 grids from 2015 covering approximately 22 square kilometers. These grids were acquired to NOAA's object detection standards. In this case, they're between 0 and 22 meters, which means they were pretty high resolution, 50 centimeter resolution. And the data was as submitted. This is data that we received, actual data we received in 2015. So it's perfectly representative of actual data quality issues. And within these 2 control grids, there were 42 verified flyers that were found using the sounding data. We verified them as flyers. So essentially that served as the truth in this exercise. They were composed of shoal, deep, and edge flyers. Here's some examples. Of the 42 flyers, there were 6 significant shoal flyers with magnitudes between 3 and 6 meters. There's one of the worst ones there. There was 10 deep flyers of those 42 verified with magnitudes between 3 and 11 meters. And then the remaining were edge flyers that are either shoal or deep, but on the edges where they're quite common, with magnitudes between 1 and 16 meters. Okay, so the results. So the machine won, with the caveat being that I chose, the deck was stacked a little bit. I chose the very best case scenario for the automated scanning and grids that are the most difficult to review manually. So the average was the humans found the flyers about 23% of the time. The machine was about 86%. The humans needed, on average, 2.5 hours and gave me back, on average, 224 flags with a false positive rate of 84%. The machine gave back 43 flags, 16% false positive rate. So again, those numbers for flags and false positives would be much higher in the steep and deep bathymetry. Again, this is the best case scenario for the automated scanning. At the same time, it's not at all uncommon to get data like this in my office. Interestingly, there were 12 flyers not found by any of the humans. All 12 of those were detected by machine, but there were 4 flyers not found by the machine, and 3 of those were detected by at least 1 human. That's kind of an interesting clue about some of the conclusions here in a bit. Okay, I want to talk about the number of flags returned by Flier Finder. I ran it at the default settings, which means the auto-estimated flyer height search, which in this case for test grid A and B was 4 meters and 2 meters respectively. So you could just say, why not just lower the search height and you can increase your detection rate to 100%. That comes at a cost, because if you lower it just 1 step, you have an increase of 136% flags, or in test grid B's case, 933%. That's a ton more flags. Essentially at that point, you're flagging every single little rock on the seafloor. That's going to be probably unbearable to deal with. Conversely, if you raise that flyer search height, you get a lot fewer flags returned, but you're going to miss some flyers. At some point, you're only flagging the very worst of the worst flyers. So you can see this is a demonstration of the output sensitivity to the flyer search height, the potential for high false positives, and it also shows you how valuable that auto-estimated search height is for the standardized use of this tool in NOAA. We really need that guidance. Okay. So the effectiveness of the manual review, the reviewers, they were between 3 and 14 years of experience, but I couldn't really find any correlation between their years of experience and the effectiveness of the review. Probably the sample size was just too small. But what I did notice was a high variation in the techniques they used. Everyone seemed to kind of be going about it a different way. This suggests the need for some more standardized practices in flyer finding. To that end, these kind of highly repeatable methods like Flier Finder will help. And I'd also like to propose that manual flyer detection, it might just be a lot more difficult than is commonly believed and has been believed for some time now. Essentially, this flyer metrics exercise, what this was, I gave them these control grids that were 50 centimeter resolution covering 22 square kilometers. If you do the math, that comes out to some 88 million grid nodes. And I was asking these brave reviewers to find 42 data points out of 88 million. That sounds extremely difficult to do manually, but that has been the expectation for years. But maybe that's a lot more difficult than is believed. The methods that we have to manually find flyers, you're using the grid, you have a lot of statistics in there. There's grid metrics, there's visualization. But these are all kind of indirect techniques of finding the flyers, whereas Flier Finder is the one that it's directly evaluating the grid nodes, asking questions if each and every node is a flyer. And as this case study shows, it's very effective in certain types of bathymetry. Okay, this is what I call the flyer detection scorecard. I said earlier there was flyers found by the machine that weren't found by the humans and flyers found by the humans that weren't found by the machine. So that tells me that if you want to have the highest likelihood of finding all the flyers in your data, you got to be doing each one of these. And I really think the automated scan is an important part of it. Okay, in conclusion, there's a recent increase in data quality and timeliness cited in Coast Survey, attributed in part to the adoption of QC tools. The automated scanning, it might not just be nice to have, but it might be critical in certain bathymetry, like this, this high resolution stuff. Why not reduce the flyers at the source? These algorithms are totally hands-off. They could be incorporated directly into the gridding process for more streamlined workflow. And also, I just want to make it clear, we're not suggesting that any of the manual qualitative review techniques should be substituted or replaced. Those remain very important. But rather, this automated bulk scanning of millions of grid nodes should be used as a complement to those manual techniques to help guide the manual techniques. Okay, and then a couple slides here about we are in this process now of variable resolution compatibility to QC tools. Variable resolution grids are coming in 2017 as an option for field units to use. And so all the QC tools that use grids will be updated. So this means Flier Finder, Holiday Finder, Grid QA, Scan Designated, and the ValSal checks. We're all undergoing updates now for VR compatibility for the field. So here's a sneak peek of a variable resolution grid. So you have these tiles defined by the blue lines. Within each tile, there could be a different resolution. So a lot of the algorithms that QC tools can work more or less the same internal within these tiles because the resolution is consistent in each tile. So a lot of the functionality can translate internally to the tile. It gets a lot trickier on the edges where the resolution changes. So that's where we're having a lot of discussions and asking a lot of questions about the best way to do that. So the first one coming out is a Holiday Finder. So you see this in this test data set, there's this holiday here. Okay, some other future work for QC tools for the survey tab. Our 2017 specifications just came out just recently, so we got to make sure that we are in alignment there with all the new specs, particularly the feature scans are the ones that get affected there. And that continued development for the seabed area export to include the CMEX classification. For the chart tab, the RH-cell requirements are constantly evolving, so there's work to do there to keep that up to date. And then this is a big ticket item, but improved contour creation. We have methods now in our processing software to derive contours automatically, shoal bias contours, but they may not be cartographically pleasing enough. We're exploring ways to auto-generate contours that maintain the shoal biasing, but are also cartographically pleasing. Might need to be some give there on some sides there, but that's kind of a big ticket development item. The DTON tab, I already said about the ability to for the multi-ENC input, and then as well as the option for a full chart comparison, which would be, I think, a very well-received tool to the field. Okay, and I definitely want to say thanks to all the people that participated in the Flier metrics exercise, which was by design quite challenging. And finally, so yeah, there's our website again. Please go on, you can download the software, check out QC Tools, find some flyers. Send one of us an email if you have questions, and we're happy to talk. And that's my last slide, so thanks a lot for your attention, everybody. Happy to answer any questions if you got them. Yes?
Do you guys roll this out to your contractors so that when you get data from them, it's easier?
Absolutely. We have the version that's available online there that is definitely being used. And they've said to me, you know, they appreciate, kind of just like what the field said, they like knowing how we're going to evaluate it so they can run the same evaluations before they send it. Makes a lot of sense. Any others? Nope. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.